Welcome to the first edition of VFL 23. Thanks to our friends at Smithies. My name's Chris Yeend, and I've got the pleasure of being joined by the great man, the voice of VFL football, Brendan Jonty Rhodes. Rhodesy, you've been a busy man, mate. You must be so pumped about the upcoming season.
Oh, no question about it. It's been a long time, hasn't it, since the third week of September when the Casey Demons had a terrific victory over Southport. It was their promise basically all year that they were going to be the best team and win the flag. Southport put up an amazing effort. No one rated the NEFL clubs basically heading into the VFL at the start of 2021. But what we saw very, very quickly is that the NEFL, while the depth may have fallen away a little bit, the quality at the top end of that competition was as good as any. And you only had to look at last year's VFL ladder: Southport 2, Brisbane Lions 3, Gold Coast 4, Sydney 5. And GWS was down in 13th. But yeah, so that proved the strength of the NEFL. It proved the strength of Southport. 9-1 in the truncated first year, made the grand final in the second year. I think people down here are starting to realise that footy is pretty good north of the border, and in 2023, I'm certain that we're going to see more of the same.
There was a lot of conversation about whether it was a great idea in theory of the benefit of having the NEFL clubs be part of the VFL, and I think with what we saw last year, there was just the competition was only stronger for it. I wonder if heading into season 23, whether the standalone clubs in Melbourne and even the AFL, VFL clubs, whether they're going to have to do their homework a lot more on some of those teams north of the border.
There's no question that they have to. There's still that separation between the AFL reserves teams and the standalone teams. And like most of the AFL clubs are going to know about each other. So there's not really any surprises coming down here from the Swans, the Giants, the Lions, or the Suns. They're going to know most of what's going on, apart from the odd, the top up players or the VFL listed players, as it were, that can come in and star. Like Riley Green had a really good year at Brisbane Lions last year, and Will Bella at Gold Coast, who's now been signed with Coburg. The Swans, Harry Morrison had a great year. Jake Bartholomeus. Then there's guys like Josh Green at GWS, who is now playing for Port Melbourne, interestingly enough. So those players have been seen, and now they're getting opportunities. And you look at the standalone clubs, and the AFL clubs are working out how good they are too. Frankston finished 17th last year, and they've had 3 players picked up during the off-season. How amazing is that? Liam Reedy to the Fremantle Dockers. I claim Tyler Young as being from Frankston, even though he played VFL for Richmond last year and then got promoted onto the Richmond senior list. And of course, last week, Brodie McLaughlin getting taken by the Gold Coast Suns, seeing off no less a player than Boyd Woodcock to get that opportunity. It surprised me that Boyd Woodcock didn't get an opportunity, because he had an unbelievable season last year. But I suppose the Suns decided they needed a marking target as opposed to a midfielder.
I think some of the other benefits as well, being a Queenslander, ex-Victorian, but one of the things I've appreciated up here, particularly in the off-season, what we saw the benefits of the VFL program last year, is we saw a number of Brisbane players in the VFL program get selected as a Category B rookie list as part of the Brisbane squad, including the young fella of Darryl the Magician White,
Darryl White Jr., McDowell White.
Yeah, and Shadow Brain, a couple of those guys.
Couple of the things that he did in that qualifying final against Southport, a couple of goals he kicked, I think that's really what secured his spot, because he was doing bits and pieces and showing signs. And again, in that game, it was still only bits and pieces and showing signs, but a couple of those highlights in front of a big audience, in an all Queensland qualifying final, That really set him apart. And like Shadow Brain is another one. I'm actually mates with his older brother James, who's played a lot of fantastic football down this way at a lower level. What a name, Shadow Brain! good on him for that. He is going to be a cult figure with a name like that if he can make it. And then you go to the same at Gold Coast with young Johnston from was it Lloyd Johnston coming out of the Darwin Academy, who's been put on the Category B rookie list, which that's what those academies are for. The rookie lists are for. And they get an opportunity in VFL, even if it is only 2, 3, 4 games. The recruiters see something, they like it, and away they go.
And I think because we're seeing a really expanded competition across the north or the eastern seaboard, eastern club, so to speak, is that players are having more opportunities to be on the same ground and compete against AFL listed players.
Yeah, exactly right, and they only get better. You play against better opposition, you get better, and that works in any type of sport at any level. You might get some nasty floggings. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's going to happen. But the only way you get better is to play better, and that's I've used that analogy more in cricket with the associate nations and that coming through, like your Afghanistans and your Netherlands and Scotland and those countries. They're only going to get better by playing against the better teams. And that's what a lot of the standalone clubs like about playing against AFL teams, 12 times out of 18 games, is they're playing against. It's a bigger challenge, of course, that they're playing against teams and players that are in full-time programs, but it lifts their game to that level, and it certainly gives the AFL clubs a chance to look at these guys and say, hey, he can go and play AFL football. I'll pick him up and give him a chance. Fergus Green getting a second chance from the Box Hill Hawks, promoted onto the Hawthorn list after kicking 50 goals. He had a go at Footscray at the Western Bulldogs a couple of years ago. Wasn't ready. Normally you'd think delisted, discarded all over. But he went back to VFL footy, proved himself all over again, and he's away. And I would think it's hard to believe that Jacob Dawson and Boyd Woodcock, for me, I think they're only 23 this year. Mm-hmm. And that's easily forgotten because, I'm sure Dorso will laugh when he hears me say this. He looks about 30, and he plays like it too. But those two are two of the best 3 players in the competition for me, as non-AFL listed players, along with the back-to-back listed medalist in Tom Gribble at Werribee. If they go and back it up again, it'll be a 3rd year in a row for Dawson of starring since he was let go by the Suns. It'll be a 2nd year in a row of starring for Woodcock since he was let go by Port Adelaide. And I would be amazed if they repeat what they did last year. I would be amazed if they don't find themselves back on AFL lists in 2024 or even in the mid-season draft if they start well enough.
Well, this gives us a chance to launch into the first quarter of VFL 23. We've sort of gone through reflection. What were some of your big highlights of 2022?
Well, I suppose the number one highlight is clearly the fact that we had a grand final for the first time since 2019. So Richmond beat Williamstown in an absolute thriller down here. Of course, the Brisbane Lions beat Southport, I think, quite comfortably in the 2019 grand final. They went undefeated. Right. So they were the 2 reigning premiers who held their title for 3 years. So to go to grand final day, it was an ordinary day, which didn't really help. But they still got a crowd that was more than most people were predicting on a wet day, and the fact that there was only one game on, with the VFLW having moved to another date, so that affected the crowd as well. But yeah, so going there on grand final day, both in July when Essendon beat the Southern Saints, in September Casey Demons beat Southport. You had two healthy crowds. I think there was about 8,000 people at the VFLW Grand Final on the first weekend in July, which was just amazing. Seeing like Essendon and Boulder supporters and Sandringham, of course, as well, who are involved in the Southern Saints, come from everywhere, because those three clubs have not seen a lot of success. So they jumped at that opportunity. Obviously, Southport coming from interstate didn't help them. But there were still people who came down from Queensland that I know of for that game, which was great to see. And I believe there was a big crowd in the Southport Sharks Club watching it on the big screen as well. So it was great to see. And Casey Demons winning their first flag in 26 years, I think it was, too, when they were back as the Springvale Scorpions in 1996. So that easily gets forgotten, that Casey had a long drought since they'd actually succeeded. So that was the biggest highlight for me. How about yours?
I think the highlight for me would be the more teams outside the Victorian hub playing finals. I think that's just a testament to the strength of what's happening in football in the non-traditional AFL states. I think that's the aim that the AFL really wants. It wants to see more success in New South Wales and Queensland, and to an extent with what we've seen through the drafting process, with what we're seeing in Darwin as well. I think for me that is the ultimate success, aside from obviously seeing a grand final. I think that's really important to the growth and development of this competition, and to get people to pay more attention, put more eyeballs onto what's happening in the northern states.
Yeah, and I actually had that on my list as well, coupled in with seeing, I think around about 2,000 people at Red Rooster Park when Southport played Brisbane Lions in an all Queensland qualifying final. A big crowd going out there, and imagine that crowd if it happens again at Fankhauser Reserve or Springfield this year, which is going to be a highlight. Seeing the new Springfield ground come into action. Obviously, they played the AFLW Grand Final there, but when it really starts kicking into gear regularly this season, it's going to be great to see. And from what I'm told, having not been to Moreton Bay, a little bit easier to get to.
Yeah, I would think so. It's a lot better place to watch football, I think. Although, saying that, at local level, Moreton Bay is one of my favourite grounds. Saturday afternoon, the first game of football that I ever watched when I moved up here, I umpired the under-18s in the morning, and then I pulled out the deck chair in the afternoon and sat back on the hill and watched the seniors. So for me, it's a great place to watch football, but if you for a VFL standard, I think Springfield, in terms of easier access to get to, it's a big winner.
Yeah, no, that's going to be good. I like last time I was up there out in that direction, they hadn't started building, but they'd sort of broken the ground, and you could see the whole sort of setup. It was a construction site, but yeah. So I'm looking forward to that, and certainly and hopefully this year getting an opportunity to maybe come up and call a game or two in Queensland if the fixture suits at some stage throughout the course of the year, and checking out that new venue and Fankhauser Reserve, of course, as well. And Brighton Homes Arena, I believe it's been dubbed, hasn't it? Springfield.
Correct.
We'll go from there, and look forward to seeing how the Lions go on their new venue. But as you said, Southport making the grand final in their second year after being second in their first year was absolutely terrific. Chris Burgess and Fergus Green, I've already touched on Fergus Green. They were the first VFL players to kick 50 goals in the season since 2013, would you believe? Obviously, Matt Hamilman would have in 2021 if the season hadn't have been cut short. But yeah, 9 years for someone to kick 50, and we had two. And Chris Burgess winning the Frosty Miller medal with 61 goals, I think it was. So we look forward to more goals and higher scores and that going on. The Northern Bull Ants, they provided a huge highlight. They only won one game, but what a win. They beat Sydney in Sydney. and the Swans went on to, of course, finish fourth on the ladder and unfortunately go out in straight sets. But for the Bull Ants to go to Sydney, go to Blacktown and beat the Swans in round 4, that was an amazing highlight as well. So, and of course, for VFLW supporters, you've got to touch on them as well. Seeing Essendon winning the premiership for the first time. It was a 5-year plan. They built up to it. They got across the line. They're only the second team to win a flag undefeated since Darebin in 2016 in the first year, although they did have 2 draws, of course. And of course, Tom Gribble, who we've mentioned, and Georgia Nanscorn winning back-to-back league medals in each competition are other big highlights for me, along with Darebin themselves, who have really struggled for the last 3 years. They were 5-2 halfway through the year before, unfortunately, falling away. But it was great to see them as one of 2 standalone clubs in the VFLW up and about again.
We won't touch too much on the lowlights because, let's be honest, there wasn't too many across both competitions last year. Also, the only lowlight that I can think is the injury to the Essendon captain in the grand final, on the verge of potentially leading the team out in the debut season. I thought that was a bittersweet ending to the season in what she played a big role in building that team up and taking to the AFLW. I just thought that was, as great as it was for her to be a premiership captain, to not be able to run out the AFLW season because of going down with a serious knee injury. I thought that was a bit of a low light across the men's and women's competitions.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And she's a terrific person. She's very loyal too. She did play a couple of AFLW games for North Melbourne a couple of years ago. But as soon as she joined Essendon, she had that great year in 2021, won the Lambert Pearce medal. AFLW clubs came calling again to give her another opportunity, and she knocked them all back. She said, Essendon gave me this opportunity. I'm going to stick with Essendon, loyal to Essendon, and when they come into the AFLW, that's where I want to be. So you're exactly right that she didn't get to experience that in season 7. And obviously because of it, we won't be seeing her in the VFLW this year, but hopefully we can see her run out in August in the first game of season 8, and that would be fantastic to see in the AFLW. The only other, I suppose, you'd have to say downside, low lights, if there's any, just very quickly. No Melbourne standalone team being able to make the finals. I think that was for the first time. They certainly took longer to get over the COVID cancellations. That was the biggest thing. The AFL clubs being able to train right through that period when the VFL clubs couldn't. I think that's what I put it down to, and I expect them to be a lot more competitive this year, and we could realistically see 3 of them make it into the top 8 this year, being Werribee, Port Melbourne and Williamstown, in my honest opinion, which we'll talk about again closer to the start of the season. The Bull Ants being unable to win more than that one game, the Western Bulldogs in the VFLW being unable to win a game after playing in the grand final in 2019. And of course, you're talking about injuries, the horror head injury to Eli Templeton from Port Melbourne playing local footy. We don't know if we're going to see him again yet. There's been no real updates. Port Melbourne have just said that they're going to give him all the time that he needs to decide what to recover and decide what he wants to do. So we certainly have our fingers crossed that we haven't seen the last of Eli Templeton, who's a terrific VFL footballer, over 100 games, a great of the competition at the moment. And I think you haven't mentioned it, but you put on your list that you got to call Josh Kennedy's return to football, which was a highlight for you.
Yeah, definitely.
A low light for me was actually, unfortunately, calling the end of his career when he did the hamstring again against North Melbourne in round 21 as he was fighting to try and get back into the AFL team. So that was certainly heartbreaking to to see him hobble off that day, and knowing that that it was probably going to be it. So I certainly take my hat off to what a wonderful career he had, and what a terrific player he was for the Sydney Swans for a long time. And certainly wish him well for the future. And of course, all the retiring players from last year. Well, I think the biggest one for me on a personal note was getting to the starting line in round 2. A lot of people know, some don't, that I had a very serious back injury and back operation during the off season last year, and there was no guarantee that I'd be able to even walk again in time for the start of the season. So to be able to get out there at AIA Centre Olympic Park in round 2 for Collingwood versus Geelong with Clutch TV, that was big for me personally. Nothing really outstanding in that particular game. I think Ollie Henry might have kicked 3 goals in the second quarter and won the game for Collingwood. But just getting back out there, being able to go on after that, went on to call 78 games of football across all different competitions and leagues. So
that has to be a record.
A bit of overkill, but
that must be a record around the entire country. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone at any level across multiple levels that have been able to call nearly 80 games of footy in 2022.
I'm sure they'll be around, so I won't necessarily make the claim, but you just love going to the football. You just love going to the football, and if you can call it when you're there, why not, eh?
Yeah.
Included in that was getting to call at the MCG, the SCG, and Cardinia Park, all of which I've been lucky enough to call at before, but to call at them all again, it's always a thrill to go to the AFL venues. Individually, the individual moments, Ben Cavara's amazing snap goal when Box Hill came from 20 points down to in time on of the last quarter to beat Werribee in what was actually my 600th game. So that was very much a memorable moment, not so much for Werribee supporters, but definitely for Benny Cavara and the Box Hill Hawks. You can still see it on the top of my Twitter at Rhodes VFL. Joel Atavi's skyscraping mark for Williamstown against the Northern Bull Ants, which was a great moment as well. And then a few from Port Melbourne. I had them and Williamstown both beat Carlton, who went on to make the semi-final. I got to call both of those. Port holding Werribee goalless in the first half of a game. That was the first time that's happened to Werribee since 1966, which was only their second year in the competition. And then calling Werribee coming back from the dead and only losing that game by 3 points, would you believe? And the other one was, again, Port Melbourne, when Cody Zeus kicked 3 goals in the last quarter, and they came from 41 points down to beat Frankston, and that was only 12 months after Frankston had beaten them by 16 goals. So, yeah, I suppose it's pretty hard to go through to cut the number of highlights down when you've done so much footy.
I had a couple of key highlights. I mean, for me to just have a chance to call VFL football was something quite spectacular. Last year on a professional scale, you talk about 78 games of footy that you called. I had the opportunity to call development football with AFL Queensland, state women's football, state men's football, VFL football, and lucky enough, the AFL football. And I think the exciting part for me was to have the opportunity to call Gold Coast Suns and see some of the guys that I'd seen through the VFL, come through and assess some of the form that they've been in. I guess for me, my favourite call was, which got a fair pump up across the socials, was an accidental call. Boyd Woodcock took a spectacular mark in the goal square for Southport. I think it was against Sydney. For me, at that time, I went a little bit bananas, but I had no idea what actually happened. So I rose with the occasion. And then when I saw Boyd on the ground, I was like, oh, that's Boyd Woodcock. He's actually marked that. So I remember getting a little bit excited, but in that frame of mind, I actually had no idea what had happened. But it did get a good run through the socials, and it was pretty exciting.
Bit more than the socials too, Yeendy, when it won Mark of the Week on the bounce.
I know. It went absolutely crazy. And truth be told, I literally, in that moment, and you know yourself with the call, there's things where you don't quite know, but you just try and make it sound exciting, hoping it's exciting. And then if
you just go with the first thing. The first thing you think of, you just go with.
Yeah,
exactly. It's as simple as that. If you try and create something, that's when it doesn't sound real. You've just got to go with your, just roll with it, basically.
Exactly. Well, and in my defence in that situation, I was 100 metres away and it was pretty dark. So for me, that was pretty cool. Calling a game off the back of a ute over at Moreton Bay was pretty special. I really enjoyed that. That was it was pretty exciting. And also another highlight is I had the opportunity to call 2 premiers last year. The one AFL game that I called was Geelong beating Gold Coast, but I also called Casey's only loss of the season for the year, and that was over at Moreton Bay. So I thought that was a pretty awesome highlight just for me personally.
You can certainly claim those, and that AFL game it doesn't matter. I'd trade my 78 for one. I've been waiting a long time, and you've got that in your bank, and no one can ever take it away from you. And yeah, hopefully that time comes for me soon, and hopefully you get many more, and we're doing an AFL game.
All right, round 1 is officially dropped for the VFL and for VFLW, thanks to our friends at Smithies. Let's quickly go through. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but let's quickly go through what we've got for the VFL to start round 1.
Oh, and it really is a blockbuster start to the season. Friday night football to kick it off. Really looking forward to that one. Icon Park at 7:05 on Friday, the 24th of March. Carlton versus Geelong. Should be an absolute cracker. Carlton, of course, made the semi-finals last year. Geelong dropped out of the finals in 2022 after being in the top 8 in that shortened 2021. They'll be keen to bounce back. But yeah, the Blues and the Cats, Friday night football. Can't wait for that. And then it's a smorgasbord in Queensland for you on the Saturday. Unfortunately, they all overlap, which is a bit of a shame. But 3 games on the Saturday afternoon in Queensland for our northern fans. The Brisbane Lions playing their first ever game at Brighton Homes Arena when they take on Werribee. And Werribee actually travelled to Queensland pretty well last year and were competitive against. I think they lost to Gold Coast by 4 points. They lost to Brisbane by 15 or something like that. And they underachieved last year. Sandringham had a terrific start to the year last season. They play Southport at Fankhauser Reserve. And the one in the middle is Williamstown taking on the Gold Coast at the Oswald Centre Oval. We certainly expect Williamstown to charge up the ladder. I know they finished 20th last year, but they have recruited out of sight. They have lost some quality, but I certainly expect them to be much more competitive this year. So they are 3 terrific games of football up in Queensland on the Saturday of round 1. Casey Demons will unfurl the flag at Casey Fields at 2:00 on the Saturday afternoon. They're playing Footscray, who was undefeated the year before, and they're another team who I would be surprised if they didn't bounce back in some way, shape or form. We need to touch on Collingwood plays Coburg at Victoria Park. An interesting one. That North Melbourne versus Port Melbourne at Arden Street is the other Saturday game. And then on Sunday, Sydney versus Box Hill at Tramway Oval, which is just outside the SCG. They'll still be pushing and hopefully be able to move that game inside, but we'll see what happens there. Richmond versus the Northern Bull Ants at the Swinburne Centre, and Essendon versus GWS will be only the second VFL game played at the NEC hangar. So a big round 1 of action, and basically 10 games right there with Frankston having the bye. 10 games where you would think there's probably at least 7 where there are going to be no clear favourites.
Absolutely. I'll go through the VFLW round 1 fixtures. We've got Darebin v Southern Saints, Carlton v Port Melbourne, Geelong v North, and Collingwood v Williamstown, which is the second game of a doubleheader at Victoria Park. And on Sunday, Essendon v Box Hill at the Hangar will be the curtain raiser to the VFL men's comp, and Western Bulldogs v Casey Demons.
Hey, sorry, mate, I will say that's out in Ballarat too. So at Mars Stadium, the Bulldogs and Casey. So a good opportunity early on for our country fans to go and enjoy VFLW football out in Ballarat.
Absolutely. Rhodes, thanks so much for jumping on board. Thanks for everyone for jumping on board. Check out the socials. We're going to be making sure that we help boost and promote the VFL 23. And, mate, as always, we're looking forward to doing some wonderful work with you across season 2023.
Can't wait for it all. Thanks very much, mate. Catch you next week.